When I bought this Twin Turbo Cadillac at a dealer wholesale auction for around half of what they usually sell for, I figured it wasn't just a scratch and dent special, even though it looked like one. And we found the real reason it was so cheap after taking apart the top of our engine and discovering a bit of slack in our timing chain. And it turns out that this is an extremely common issue for a lot of other General Motors cars that come with a similar timing chain setup. The good news here is that since this problem happens all the time, there's a ton of parts available to fix it. Heck, I picked up an entire timing kit for just $80 from a company that claims their parts are made in the USA, which is crazy because a dealer won't even give you a latte from their fancy coffee machine for that amount of money. I mean, look at this. I found a forum post from someone with the same car having the same exact issue, and they were quoted $19,000 for an entire engine replacement. So with the help of the internet and this nice shady tree, we should be able to get this thing running right on a super budget, and we'll probably need a little bit of luck along the way, considering this thing came with one pretty big problem, along with 2 turbochargers. Of course, it's over-engineered with 3 timing chains, 4 variable valve timing solenoids, but at least it has pretty comfortable seating for 5, where I could take a break and enjoy Pick 6 by DraftKings, my favorite way to play daily fantasy sports. Especially right now, just in time for the Super Bowl, new players can get $59 in Pick 6 credits when they play just $5. Now, I just went and locked in my picks, and it's really easy to play. All you gotta do is pick at least 2 players, then you're gonna pick higher or lower on their stats. The more players you pick, the more the multiplier. Now, I think this is going to be a super close game, but you know Kansas City is bringing this home for the 3rd time in a row, and because of that, I made these 3 picks. Getting started is easier than unraveling this timing chain. All you have to do is hit the link in the description box to download the Pick 6 app. All new players who play $5 will get $59 in Pick 6 credits, and make sure you use my code SAMCRACK during sign up. Of course, I got to give a huge thanks to DraftKings for sponsoring this video, and I want to wish all of you good luck. Before we go any further on this car, we should just make it a little safer to work on and get these hood struts that are completely shot off, and replace them with these brand new ones. Here's the old one. I could compress it by hand. With just one installed, you can see the hood stays open by itself. This is one of those super simple jobs that would cost probably a few $100s at a shop. And there's third-party parts all over the internet that cost like anywhere between 10 to 20 bucks for a replacement. Now we can work on this without worrying about it falling on our head. So we've got most everything off in order to pull that front timing cover and actually start timing this car. All we need off is this water pump pulley and the crank pulley. There's a special tool for that, but when it comes to getting the crank pulley bolt out, there is no special tool, which is a strange one on this car. A lot of the times you'll see a locking pin that'll lock the crankshaft in place. So you literally just torque the heck out of the bolt and it comes right off. Like on the Porsche Panamera, you have this really long tool that gives you a lot of leverage, and then there's also a pin in the crankshaft at the same time when you're removing that bolt. In this case, there's no special tool to lock the crank, so I'm going to do things the best way I know how to do them. We're going to grab a wrench in one hand, we're going to grab our breaker bar in the other hand and go in opposite directions and see if this thing breaks loose. Now, I'm just now noticing something as I'm taking this out. Do you see those blue marks on our crank pulley here? That's another thing I don't want to see. It makes me think that somebody has messed around in this engine bay before and possibly done this job one other time. But then again, look, there's some blue marks on this bracket right here. That also could just be something from the factory. Heck, look, there's a blue mark on this little valve. Look, blue mark here. Okay, we're going to go with the idea that maybe we are the first ones to do it. I'm hoping that's the case. I'm hoping we see some sort of worn out guide or tensioner in there. All right, hopefully I'm just overthinking it, but there's our crank pull. Let's get the rest of this off and figure out what we're in for. Besides the cam locking tools, the only other specialty tool necessary to get this job done is a pulley puller. And you can see one of the legs is missing on mine, and that's because I decided to ignore what the internet had to say. As much as I hate to admit, the comment section is usually right. And well, in this case, the reviews for this tool were bad. Now, the original tool from the factory is like $100. This one's a clone, and it only costs right around $20. And the funny thing is, when you type in the part number for this tool, you'll actually find more listings for this than you will the original tool. Of course, I wanted to save some money, but in this case, it's totally not worth it. It doesn't work at all. So this seems to happen to me a lot. I try to save a little bit of money. It ends up costing me quite a bit more in time. We're gonna have to find an alternate solution here. All right, so the auto parts store had this one, and it says it works for all the GM like LS-based engines, which this one supposedly works for too. And it was only 50 bucks, so we're still saving money compared to the original tool as long as it doesn't snap in half. Oh, but it did come with a lifetime guarantee, so we're good either way. We're just gonna wanna put our little catch basin under here because we're about to pull the water pump off right there. All right, I'm just gonna give it a little bit of wiggling, make sure everything's off. There it goes, all right. Do the same on the other side. All right, just really in there. Just try not to scratch anything. Oh, look, there's one bolt. Look, there it is. Forgot one. Here it comes. All right, that is gonna do it, watch. There, now it's rocking back and forth. There it is, okay. Okay, there we go. It's off. It's just a matter of now pulling it all the way out, making sure nothing is connected. All right. So here we go. We've got 3 different timing chains. And just take a look at the first one here. It's got a ton of slack in it. The guide is separating from its bracket. And then here's the one that runs the oil pump down here. How's this one feel? Oh, that one's loose as could be too. It's going to be interesting to see where the failure points in this system are. You know, everyone says that the timing chains stretch, but like, again, right here, we've already found a failed guide, and then we're going to have a handful of these hydraulic rams too, and those can go bad. Look, I can push that one in by hand. I don't think you should be able to do that. Either way, all of this has to come off, but before it does, we're going to try and get this as close to being in time as we can, and we're going to start with the marks all the way down here. Do you see that little dot right there on the engine? And then if we angle this up just a little bit, you should see on the sprocket there's a dot down there. Nowadays, most modern cars have tool sets to assist in making a timing job perfect and straightforward. In the case of this GM engine, there's only one set of tools that are for checking the position of the camshaft, and that's it. I actually 3D printed this set, which will cost us next to nothing, and I compared them to the factory tools, and you can see how spot on they are. But I personally wish that there was something that locked the crank into place while you do your work. A hair off on any of these things, and the job has to happen twice. And when you read the factory procedure on how to time this engine, it'll make your head spin. General Motors breaks this up into stage 1 and stage 2 timing. And the first time I read this, I immediately started overthinking everything, and well, it just made the process that much more complicated. So let's throw all the technical terms out the window and resort to some old school methods to help us get this right. Now, even though we lined up these dots, we might not be exactly where we need to be. When you time an engine, you always start in top dead center, which means that cylinder 1 is at its topmost position. On this engine, it takes 2 full revolutions to make this happen. So to confirm we're in TDC, I'll just use a thin wooden dowel and turn the engine over by hand until I feel it get to its highest point. And then we can go back, look at our dots, and see that we're also matched up. And here we are. This is perfect. And we can just visibly see the flats on the back of the camshaft up here. We can check and see which bank is out of time, or if both banks are out of time, by counting the amount of links between the marks on our phasers here. So the marks on the left side of the engine are going to be L to L, and there should be 10 links in between the 2 L's. You can see where the dot is on the gear itself. So we're going to start here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. and then we've got a dot. So actually, this side should be halfway decent and in time. So if we take our timing tool for this side and we slip it over, it is so super close to the point where I would say that right there, that's acceptable, okay? This bank is in time as far as I can tell. We come over here, we're gonna look for the letter R. We're gonna go, there's our dot, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and it's tough to see, but the R is the next link over. We're out 1 or 2 teeth on this side here. So that's what's causing our codes, that's what's causing our engine to run rough. It's just this side, and it makes sense since we got all that slack on the right side. One chain, take this off. All right, there's 2 chains, our 3rd chain right there. All right. So here are all the parts that just came out of the engine, and I have them positioned according to where they came from. And if you look at the plastic guides, they're in darn great shape for 100,000 miles. If you'll see, they say Cloys on them, but then here there's GM and a part number. So this is likely the original set. Cloys does make a set for this car. I noticed it when I was buying mine, but I'd imagine if you bought the set just strictly from Cloys, they wouldn't have this General Motors part number stamped on there. So I'm going to go with the idea that this was the original timing set. And again, to see plastic guides intact after over 100,000 miles, it's really good. But what I am noticing just on either side, I'm noticing that we've got a lot of gap between the actual brackets for the guides and the guides themselves, especially on the right side bank here. Look at how much movement is in there. But you wouldn't think that would cause it to skip time unless something got jammed up. It's not making a whole lot of sense. I'm imagining that on the new part, we won't see this much play. The tensioners themselves, now that all the oil's out of them, we're going to be able to move them, so we can't really tell much from looking at them. The only other thing we can kind of do is a visual inspection on the chains. Right here's the smoking gun. It's pretty clear that our original chain is longer than the new one, so we've got chain stretch. I always thought the chain stretch would have to be measured with a fine tool because you wouldn't even be able to see it, but it's so obvious here. And it was the case with all 3 of the chains, the passenger side being the worst of the bunch. Now, since our driver's side bank is already in time, I just installed the chain, guides, and tensioner, paying close attention to each timing mark in the engine and match them to the orange links on the new chain. But at the perspective that I'm doing all this, it's impossible to actually line up all the marks accurately. So I relied heavily on my scope camera to find all the timing marks and continue to match them up as we installed these parts. With one chain on, all we have to do is install the next ones moving counterclockwise, but before we do the next one, I figured it wouldn't hurt to replace the oil pump. This OEM part actually costs more than the entire engine timing set at around $150, but it's one of the most vital pieces of our engine, and it's right here, held in with just 3 bolts. So the new oil pump fitted and our marks still lined up. I went and I hung the driver's side timing chain along with all the guides, tensioner, and hardware. Even though we have a little bit of slack here, that's only because I have not pulled the pin on the tensioner, just so I can triple check everything when we get all the chains installed. Now, in theory, all we have to do is install the chain and hardware on both the oil pump and the passenger side, but this is where I ran into a little bit of an issue. The second I touched this cam, it spun around real quick because it's under tension by all the springs. That was a bit of a setback, as before we were off just a link. Now there's no telling how far I've messed this up. This side was troublesome in general. Neither the original timing tools fit nor the 3D printed ones, and it's tougher to find the flat spot on these camshafts because they're just completely different than the standard non-turbo V6 engine, which the tools were originally made for. So this side will be done solely by sight. This photo was a big help because it shows you how everything should be sitting when it's done, which helped me roughly get the cams back in the right spot so that we could test fit the chain. All right, our second chain is on. Everything's looking good. All of our marks are lined up. And now we got to put on the last one. To be safe, I'm going to go ahead and pull the pin on our tensioners And I'm doing this purposely right now because if we shift anything while we're putting on that third chain, well, basically we've got to take off everything we just did and redo it over again because, you know, each chain is in sync with each other. Before we install the last chain, we have to move our crankshaft to another mark. Right now, we're in the 5 o'clock position and we'll have to turn it to 8 o'clock. This is known as stage 2. Since there's only 2 chains installed right now, when we rotate the crank, we're only moving that left bank into its stage 2 position. We've manually put the right bank into its stage 2 position, and while some procedures will tell you to skip the whole stage 2 portion of this job, it seems to be the only way ahead for us since we're doing this by sight. Now we can test fit our chain, matching up its orange lines with the marks on the cam gears. So all our marks are good, they're all lined up, and I've got a zip tie taking the slack out of the chain, but we're running into a problem, and that's that when we try and fit the one guide in the side here, there's just not enough slack to get the guide installed, which tells me that we've got too much slack on this side, which you could clearly see, and that means we need to take the slack out of this side and get, you know, one chain link over this way, which means that this is a hair off still, which is crazy. There's got to be some special tool out there in order to get this job done on this engine. I don't like just guessing like this. All we needed was just a little finesse. I gave the gear a tiny nudge to get it to move over, and now we're back lined up in all 3 spots and have what feels like equal slack on either side of the chain, and we can easily install our guides and tensioners. And now we can pull that final pin. This is it. Everything is replaced. I just really hope that we did it right. Now it's time that we check our work, but since we installed a new oil pump, I don't want to run dirty old motor oil and stuff that's mixed in it from us opening the engine through it. I went ahead, pulled our oil filter and drain plug, and just refilled everything. Also, just to make sure everything is nice and smooth, when we turn it over, I poured some motor honey all over the new chains. Now, once we spin this motor, none of our chain marks will line up, at least not for a while. So what we're really making sure here is that we don't have any binding. If we got something majorly wrong and the valves touch the pistons while we're spinning things by hand, it's not a big deal, as we would have to apply a ton of force to break something. This is why this step is always so important. And while timing jobs can be intimidating, because if you do the work wrong, it will end up in catastrophic failure, the constant double checking of our work will at the very least assure we don't have any valve to piston contact when we actually start this thing. I stopped turning it over when the marks on our cam gears were upright, and I did one last check, counting 10 links on either side. At this point, you'd have to think we could just slap it back together and start it up, but all of our covers have multiple seals and they're all old, brittle, and busted, so I started by replacing them all and then laying a bead of RTV around the cover. It's really helpful to have a second person guide you when you're reinstalling these timing covers, since they're big and cumbersome and we don't want to mess up that RTV that we just laid down. So my friend Mike assisted me with lining it up and getting it in place. Now we can let this fresh seal cure while we continue assembly. When I was cleaning the valve covers and pulling out the spark plug seals, I noticed a small, dried up and cracked seal in the back. This is the only part I hadn't ordered a replacement for, and of course, the only way to install it is with the cover off the car. So I called all the local dealers and auto parts stores, and nobody carries this thing within like a several 100-mile radius. Even Amazon was out of stock. At this point, I was dying to run the car to make sure our work was right, but we're gonna have to hold off until we get this part. But I think I figured out a workaround to where we can actually test this and have the car confirm that we did things right. We're gonna leave the engine just like this. And I've got all the electrical components hooked up that recognize our timing system. So that part will work. What we don't have hooked up is the ignition system, so no spark plugs or ignition coils. And then I went and found the appropriate fuse box. It's not that one. The fuel pump fuse actually lives here in the trunk, that yellow one down in the bottom left corner. We're gonna go ahead and pull that. We'll put it right here, and then we'll hook our battery up. And then we're gonna go and just enter our engine control module here. And we've got the LF3 engine. So we've got a bunch of funny codes here because, well, these things just aren't plugged in, right? So it recognizes that these are wrong. We could clear them, but we do not have any timing codes currently in the module. If the starter goes and turns this thing and we're out of time, I'm pretty darn sure it's going to log that as a fault. So we'll go back. 3, 2, 1. I went and regenerated all our codes from the last start attempt, and all that came back were things related to the intake not being on the car, which is good. There were no correlation codes, which leads me to believe that the car is in time. I'm pretty sure it would trip a code even though it didn't start up. And while I hate to leave you without having the car start right this instant, I much rather hate to take everything apart a second time after reassembling it over one tiny seal. Now, when I looked online for this seal, there was only one place that had it and had it readily available, and that was a place called ZZ Performance. And while I was going through their page, I noticed they have a lot of cool stuff for this platform, including a set of timing tools for the twin turbo V6 engine, which like blew my mind. I wish I had known about this before I attempted the job, because I could tell you it cost me about a day worth of the just thought behind how are we going to get this done without having any special tools that will work on this car. And I swear to you, GM does not make a set of timing tools specifically for this LF3 and LF4 engines. They just have those generic ones, which we had earlier. And I would imagine the people doing the job on the generic engine could figure it out pretty quickly on here. But if you're doing it for your first time and you want to do it right, you probably don't want to rush it. You know, after hearing the story of a dealership recommending a whole new engine replacement when all I needed was a timing chain, made me hope that I could show you guys timing an engine isn't all that hard. And really, it isn't. The special tools would have made things a whole lot easier, and you could tend to overthink things like I did here, but we were able to get it done. We did it without those special tools, and a lot of the times these things are much easier than this platform was. Still, I think anybody can do this at home with basic hand tools. And while I hope your car isn't having these troubles or having them anytime soon, I do hope you learned something. And if you did, be sure to hit that like button. Also, when I was on ZZP's website, I didn't just pick up the seal that we needed for our valve cover. I also bought a few other things to turn the boost up in this car and get it up over 500 horsepower. So make sure you're subscribed to the channel, because that'll be the next video up, and the people that subscribe will be the first ones to know when it drops. Guys, I can't thank each and every one of you enough for watching today, and I'll catch you very soon.